He was just looking for a place to sleep. But 3 Apache widows wanted something more. John had been traveling for days, and every step he took felt heavier than the last. His boots were worn, his clothes dusty and torn in places, and his stomach reminded him constantly that he hadn't eaten enough. The sun had already begun its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The wind carried with it the scent of dry grass and distant pine forests. John's journey had not been an easy one, but he had no choice. He was searching not just for a place to rest, but also for a chance to forget, even if just for a moment, the hardships that had followed him for months. The land he walked through was mostly empty, the kind of wilderness that could make a person feel both free and incredibly small at the same time. Here, there were no towns, no bustling roads, only the whisper of the wind and the occasional cry of a bird overhead. John had grown used to traveling alone. It was a habit, a comfort, though it often brought loneliness that pressed heavily on his chest during the quiet nights. Yet, even with all his experience in wandering, tonight felt different. The chill in the air seemed sharper, and the darkness crept across the land faster than usual. After hours of walking, his eyes finally caught a faint glimmer of smoke rising in the distance. He squinted, unsure if his tired mind was playing tricks on him. But as he drew closer, the smoke grew thicker, and soon he could make out the shapes of small cabins nestled against the edge of a canyon. They looked old, worn by time, but still sturdy enough to offer shelter. Relief washed over John. For days he had feared the emptiness of the wilderness, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, he saw a place where he might find warmth and food. John approached slowly, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. He knew that outsiders were often unwelcome in remote areas, and he didn't want to startle anyone. The cabins appeared quiet, almost as if they had been waiting for someone to arrive, and the faint smell of cooking food teased his nose. His stomach growled, reminding him sharply of his hunger. He walked to the nearest cabin and knocked gently on the door. The door creaked open, and John found himself face to face with a woman who must have been in her late 30s. Her hair was long, dark, and streaked with silver at the temples. Her eyes, deep and alert, studied him carefully. For a moment, John felt as if she could see everything about him, his exhaustion, his hunger, even the weariness in his soul. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she motioned for him to step inside. Inside, the cabin was simple but surprisingly warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of bread baking filled the small space. 2 other women were there, moving quietly and efficiently. One of them tended to the fire, adding kindling, while the other arranged bowls and utensils on a wooden table. They all looked up as John entered, and for a moment, silence hung between them. Then the first woman, who appeared to be the eldest, spoke. "You must be tired," she said softly, her voice steady but kind. "Sit by the fire, we have food." John's relief was immediate. He nodded and accepted the bowl of steaming stew they offered him. The warmth of the food and the fire seeped into his bones, chasing away some of the cold that had settled in him during his long walk. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, as the women watched him with quiet interest. Their presence was gentle but careful, as if they were measuring him, trying to understand who he was and why he had come here. As he ate, John's eyes wandered around the cabin. The walls were lined with handmade decorations, small carvings, and woven fabrics that added color to the otherwise plain room. Everything had a sense of purpose and care. It was clear that the women valued their home and the life they had built together. John felt a strange mix of admiration and awe. This place, hidden away in the wilderness, seemed to hold stories he would never fully know, stories of survival, loss, and resilience. Once he had finished eating, John thanked them, his voice low and sincere. "I don't know how I can repay your kindness," he said. The eldest woman shook her head. "No need," she said simply. Everyone needs a place to rest sometimes. You are welcome here, but you must understand this is our home. Respect it and you will have nothing to fear." John nodded again, understanding the unspoken warning behind her words. He wasn't the first stranger to wander here, and he likely wouldn't be the last. Still, for now, he was grateful. That night, as he lay down on the simple bedding they had prepared for him, John thought about the lives of the women who had welcomed him. There was something in the way they moved, spoke, and watched him that spoke of loss. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt it keenly. He realized that they had survived hardship, perhaps more than he could imagine, and yet they still carried warmth in their hearts for a stranger like him. Sleep came slowly at first. John's mind wandered over the days that had brought him here, the lonely nights under the stars, the constant uncertainty of where he would find shelter next. But as the fire in the cabin flickered and the wind howled outside, he felt a sense of security that had been absent for a long time. For the first time in many days, he allowed himself to let go of the tension in his muscles, the worry in his mind. Here in this remote cabin he could rest. Outside, the wind continued to sweep across the plains, carrying whispers of the past. The women, who had long since experienced the harshness of life, watched over their home quietly, their hearts stirred by the presence of this stranger. They had lived alone for years, supporting each other, but something about John's arrival awakened memories they thought they had buried. Memories of love, of companionship, of the men they had once trusted and lost. And though none of them spoke of it aloud, they felt a cautious curiosity, an interest that would shape the days to come. By morning, John awoke to the smell of fresh bread and the sound of birds outside the cabin. He felt a little stronger than the night before, nourished not only by food, but by the quiet kindness of the women around him. As he sat by the fire, drinking warm tea that one of the sisters had prepared, he realized that this place, though strange and unexpected, had offered him something he hadn't felt in a long time. A feeling of safety, of belonging, even if only for a moment. Little did John know, this simple act of seeking shelter would mark the beginning of a chapter in his life that none of them could have anticipated. The widows had their own stories, their own hearts, and their own desires that had remained hidden for years. And now their paths had crossed with his, setting the stage for events that would test emotions, bonds, and choices in ways they could never imagine. As John stepped outside that morning, stretching his stiff legs, he looked at the rising sun and felt a sense of hope. Today was another day of travel, but here, even for a brief time, he had found warmth, food, and perhaps something more valuable: human connection in its simplest and purest form. And in that quiet moment, the world felt a little less harsh, the road a little less lonely, and the future a little more uncertain, but in a way that invited possibility rather than fear. The morning sun poured through the small windows of the cabin, warming the wooden floors and the simple furniture within. John woke slowly, feeling rested in a way he hadn't for weeks. The fire had burned down to glowing embers overnight, leaving the cabin cozy but quiet. As he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, he noticed the women moving about their morning routines with practiced ease. Maya, the eldest, was gathering herbs and preparing tea. Leela, the middle sister, carried a basket of fresh eggs from the small coop outside, and Rosalie, the youngest, was tending to the small garden behind the cabin, carefully inspecting each plant. John rose quietly, not wanting to disturb them, but Maya noticed immediately. She looked up from the herbs in her hands and gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Sleep well," John nodded. "Better than I have in days, thank you." She gave a slight nod, returning to her work, but her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. There was a sharp intelligence in Maya's gaze, a sense of awareness that John felt but could not fully understand. Leela appeared beside him with a bright smile, her hair catching the sunlight as she moved. "You'll need breakfast," she said cheerfully. It's simple, but it will give you strength for the day." John accepted the plate of eggs and bread she offered and found a seat near the table. The sisters worked around him in comfortable silence, each movement deliberate, almost rhythmic. The cabin, though small, seemed to have a life of its own. The smell of herbs mixed with the faint scent of earth from the garden, and the soft sound of the wind against the cabin walls created a sense of calm that John had not felt in months. He took a deep breath, letting himself feel for the first time that he could rest not just his body, but also his mind. As he ate, the sisters began to speak more openly, though carefully. Leela asked about his travels, curious about the places he had seen. "It must be strange," she said, "to see so much of the world and yet carry nothing but your own memories." John smiled faintly, sensing the depth of her question. "It is strange," he admitted. "But it also teaches you to notice things you might otherwise miss, the small beauty in the world, the kindness of strangers. That's why I keep going, I suppose." Rosalie, who had been tending to a small pile of firewood, paused and looked at him. Her eyes were soft, thoughtful. "And do you ever get tired of moving?" she asked quietly. "Of never staying in one place?" John considered her question carefully. "Yes," he said at last, "more than I can describe, but sometimes the road is the only place that feels like freedom. You meet people, see new things, and you learn about yourself." There was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition of the unspoken truths about life. The sisters exchanged subtle glances, each one processing the presence of this traveler who had wandered into their lives so unexpectedly. They had lived together for years, relying only on each other after losing the men they had loved. Their hearts had grown careful, guarded against strangers, but John was different. There was a gentleness to him, a quiet respect that stirred something in each of them. After breakfast, John offered to help with chores around the cabin. At first, Maya hesitated, unsure if it was wise to let an outsider into their routines, but Leela clapped her hands in excitement. "Yes, help. It will be fun," she said. John smiled and followed her outside. He helped carry buckets of water from the nearby stream, stack firewood, and repair a section of the small fence around the garden. The sisters watched him as he worked, their eyes measuring his strength, his character, and perhaps more than they intended. Maya observed him from a distance, noting the care he took in every task. Leela laughed lightly at his clumsy attempt to lift a heavy log but was pleased by his persistence. Rosalie, quiet and reserved, offered a helping hand when needed, her fingers brushing against his briefly. Each touch, each shared moment, seemed to deepen an unspoken connection. As the day wore on, they sat together under the shade of a large tree near the cabin. John listened to the stories the sisters shared about their lives, their losses, and the challenges of surviving in a harsh landscape. He realized that their strength was rooted not just in resilience, but in their unwavering bond with each other. They had endured much, and yet there was warmth, laughter, and a sense of hope that lingered in their presence. The sisters were fascinated by John's tales of the wider world. He spoke of mountains, rivers, and towns far beyond their isolated home. He described the people he had met, the kindness he had received, and the dangers he had narrowly escaped. His stories were vivid, and for a moment the sisters allowed themselves to imagine life beyond the canyon walls. There was a spark of curiosity in their eyes, a reminder that even those who had endured loss could still dream. Yet, beneath the calm and curiosity, tension quietly built. Each sister felt a subtle pull toward John, a mixture of fascination and longing they hadn't experienced in years. Maya admired his quiet strength and the way he approached life with careful thought. Leela was drawn to his humor and the way he seemed genuinely interested in her world. Rosalie felt a deep empathy for him, sensing a loneliness that mirrored her own. None of them had expected to encounter someone like him, and the realization stirred emotions that were both exciting and unsettling. John, meanwhile, remained unaware of the growing attention. He was grateful for their kindness and their company, but he focused mostly on recovering his strength and learning about the people who had taken him in. He enjoyed the sense of calm, the feeling of belonging, and the rare chance to rest without worry. But he also noticed subtle signs, the lingering glances, the gentle touches, that hinted at emotions he could not yet fully understand. As evening approached, the sky turning soft shades of pink and gold, the sisters prepared a meal together. John assisted where he could, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot under Leela's watchful eye. The conversation was lighter now, filled with laughter and shared stories. For a brief moment, the hardships of their past seemed distant, replaced by the simple joy of companionship. After dinner, they sat near the fire once again, the flames casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Maya spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "You are welcome here, John," she said, "but you must understand that our lives are built carefully. We protect each other and we have our own ways. You are a guest, and we ask that you respect that." John nodded, sensing the seriousness behind her words. "I understand," he replied. "I will not intrude. I am grateful for your kindness, and I want only to respect your home." The night grew quiet, and John found himself reflecting on the day. He realized that this encounter was unlike any he had experienced before. The sisters were not just offering shelter. They were offering a glimpse into lives shaped by resilience, love, and shared loss. He felt a sense of gratitude, but also a growing curiosity about the women themselves, their pasts, their thoughts, and the subtle ways they had begun to influence him. As he lay down to sleep that night, the fire crackling softly nearby, John thought about the days ahead. He knew he could not stay forever, but he also understood that his presence had already stirred something within the sisters. There was a quiet tension, a mixture of curiosity and emotion that promised the days to come would be far from ordinary. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. The sisters watched him from their corner of the cabin, each lost in thought. They had survived alone for years, but this stranger had awakened feelings they thought had long been buried. The quiet of the night seemed to hold a promise, a hint that life could still bring unexpected encounters, moments of connection, and perhaps even new beginnings. For John, the journey had brought him here, to this small cabin on the edge of the canyon, to meet these women who had shaped their lives through resilience and love. For the sisters, the wanderer had arrived unexpectedly, a reminder that life could still surprise, and that the heart, even after loss, could still feel the stirrings of hope. As the night deepened, each of them drifted into sleep, carrying with them thoughts of the day, of the shared moments, and of the possibilities that the future might hold. The quiet cabin, nestled in the wilderness, became a space of connection, reflection, and the subtle beginnings of a story none of them could yet predict. The next morning arrived slowly, the sun spilling golden light across the small cabin and the rugged landscape beyond. John awoke feeling a mixture of restfulness and curiosity. His time at the cabin had been more than just a place to sleep. It had offered him something he hadn't felt in months, a sense of belonging. As he rose and stretched, he could hear the sisters moving about, their routines already underway. Maya was tending to the herbs by the window, Leela was preparing the chickens for the day, and Rosalie was gathering fresh water from the stream nearby. John dressed quickly and stepped outside to help. The crisp morning air filled his lungs, and for the first time in days, he felt the kind of energy that came from being part of a small, purposeful community. He carried a bucket to the stream, noticing how the sisters worked together seamlessly, each with their own role, yet all in perfect harmony. Watching them, he realized how strong and independent they were. Their lives had been shaped by hardship, but also by resilience, trust, and unspoken understanding. Maya approached him as he returned from the stream, carrying her basket of herbs. Her gaze was steady, and there was something in her expression that made John pause. "You have a careful way about you," she said quietly. "Even in simple tasks you pay attention. That is not common in travelers who pass through. Many just rush through life, never noticing what is around them." John looked at her, caught off guard by the observation. "I suppose I've learned to notice," he replied. "When you travel as much as I have, you begin to see small details that others miss. They become important because they are the only things you can rely on sometimes." Maya nodded thoughtfully, and for a moment silence fell between them. Leela appeared beside him, her usual cheerful demeanor brightening the moment. "You make even work seem like an adventure," she said, laughing lightly. "Who would have thought fetching water could be so entertaining?" John smiled, feeling warmth from the attention. There was a gentle energy in the cabin, a mix of curiosity, admiration, and cautious interest. The sisters had welcomed him into their home, but now it seemed that each had begun to notice him in ways that went beyond simple hospitality. He felt the subtle shifts in the air, the small glances, the lingering touches, and the quiet smiles exchanged between them. It was unfamiliar territory for him, and he couldn't help but feel a mixture of fascination and unease. Throughout the day, John found himself becoming more attuned to the sisters' emotions. When Maya spoke, her words carried both authority and care, as if she were assessing not just his abilities but his character. Leela's laughter and playful teasing were lighthearted, but there was a spark in her eyes that suggested she enjoyed his presence more than she let on. Rosalie's quiet observation was perhaps the most unsettling for John. Her eyes followed him with a softness that made him aware of the loneliness she, too, carried. Each sister seemed to bring out a different aspect of his own personality, a strength he hadn't recognized, a humor he hadn't used, and a sensitivity he rarely allowed himself to show. As the afternoon sun climbed high, they all worked together to repair part of the fence around the garden. John noticed the careful coordination between the sisters, the unspoken communication that came from years of shared experience. They moved in harmony, yet each had moments where they sought his input or assistance. Leela's hands brushed his briefly as she handed him a tool, and he felt a small spark of awareness. Rosalie's fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary when guiding him with the placement of a post. Even Maya, reserved and cautious, seemed to watch him with interest, assessing not only his skill but his patience and temperament. By late afternoon, the work was done, and they all gathered under the shade of a large tree, the soft breeze rustling the leaves. They rested, enjoying the fruits of their labor, and shared small, intimate stories of the past. John listened carefully, realizing that the sisters' lives had been marked by challenges far beyond what most people could endure. Yet in their stories, there was no bitterness, only a quiet strength and a shared sense of resilience. The more he learned about them, the more he respected their courage and independence. It was during these quiet moments that John began to sense the subtle tension growing among them. The sisters, who had shared everything with each other for years, were now navigating the presence of an outsider, whose charm, kindness, and curiosity seemed to awaken emotions they had long suppressed. Maya's protective nature sometimes softened when he spoke, her gaze lingering on him as if weighing the possibilities. Leela's playful teasing carried a different tone now, flirtatious but never crossing boundaries. Rosalie, usually reserved, seemed more open in her interactions, her empathy and gentleness reaching out to him in ways that made him uneasy yet intrigued. John struggled to understand the dynamics. He had traveled extensively and met many people, but never had he encountered a situation like this: three women, bound together by history and shared pain, each drawn to him in different ways. He felt a deep respect for their lives, yet he also sensed the stirrings of something more complex. He wondered if he should address it, but he feared that doing so might disrupt the delicate balance they had maintained for years. As evening approached, the sisters prepared a meal together. John helped where he could, chopping vegetables and stirring the stew. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and gentle teasing. They shared small glimpses of their dreams, their hopes, and even their fears. It became clear to John that each sister carried a longing, not just for companionship, but for understanding, for someone who could see them fully and accept them without judgment. The thought both intrigued and unsettled him, for he had come here only seeking a place to rest, yet he now found himself entangled in emotions he had not anticipated. After dinner, they gathered by the fire, the flames casting warm light across their faces. Maya spoke first, her tone serious but not unkind. "John, you are welcome here," she said, "but you must understand that our lives are intertwined. We protect each other, and we have rules that help us maintain balance. This is not just a home, it is a bond between us that must not be broken lightly." John nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I promise," he replied, "I will not disrupt your lives. I am grateful for your kindness and your trust, and I want only to respect it." The sisters exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. It was clear that they had sensed something deeper in John's presence, something that went beyond gratitude and simple hospitality. They had been alone for so long, each relying on the others, yet now they were faced with feelings they had not anticipated. The quiet of the cabin seemed to hold a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. As the night grew darker, John prepared for sleep, the fire burning low in the hearth. He lay on the bedding they had provided, reflecting on the day. He realized that his presence had begun to stir emotions in the sisters, and perhaps even within himself. There was a complexity to their interactions, a subtle push and pull that he had not encountered before. He wondered how long he could remain here without affecting the delicate balance of their lives. Outside, the wind whispered against the cabin walls, carrying with it the scent of earth and pine. The sisters watched him from their corner, each lost in thought. They had survived alone for years, their hearts guarded and cautious. Yet John's presence had awakened a curiosity and a longing that they had not felt in a long time. They recognized the risk, the potential for conflict, but also the rare opportunity for connection. That night, sleep came fitfully for all of them. John dreamed of distant roads and the endless sky, but beneath the dream lingered the awareness of the women who had welcomed him. The sisters, too, found their thoughts drifting to the stranger who had entered their lives, stirring feelings that were both exciting and unsettling. Each wondered how the days to come would unfold, aware that the simple act of giving shelter had set in motion a story that none of them could yet predict. By morning, the tension had not disappeared, but it had shifted into a quiet anticipation. John rose with the sun, feeling the weight of unspoken emotions in the cabin. The sisters greeted him as usual, their smiles warmer, their glances more deliberate. There was an unspoken understanding that today would be another day of learning, of testing boundaries, and of navigating the complex emotions that had begun to surface. John stepped outside into the crisp morning air, feeling both excitement and uncertainty. He had come seeking only a place to rest, yet he now realized that his presence had begun to change the dynamics of the cabin in ways he could not fully control. The sisters, who had long relied only on each other, were discovering new emotions, and he was discovering aspects of himself he had long ignored. The journey that had brought him here was far from over, and the days to come promised to challenge, teach, and transform all of them in ways that would leave lasting marks on their lives. The morning sun rose slowly over the canyon, casting long shadows across the small cabin and the rugged land surrounding it. John awoke feeling a mixture of anticipation and unease. He had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of life with the three sisters, yet there was a subtle tension that hung in the air, a tension he felt more keenly with each passing day. Today, he sensed, would be different. The sisters had begun to show their emotions more openly, and he could no longer ignore the currents of curiosity and longing that now ran beneath their everyday interactions. As he stepped outside, the cool air filled his lungs. Maya was already at work, tending to the herbs and small plants near the cabin. Her movements were precise and calm, yet when she noticed John watching, a flicker of something unspoken passed across her eyes, a mix of caution and curiosity. Leela emerged from the cabin, carrying water and smiling brightly, her energy infectious. Rosalie appeared from the garden, her hands slightly damp from tending the soil, and her gaze lingered on John for a moment longer than usual. Each sister had begun to show a side of themselves he hadn't fully seen before, and it made the simple acts of morning chores feel charged with subtle meaning. John offered to help with the water again, and Maya finally nodded approvingly. "It's good that you want to help," she said. "But remember, our home is built on understanding and respect. Every action matters." John nodded, aware of the layers of care and caution woven into the words. He had seen this before in travelers, people trying to charm or take advantage of others, but it was clear to him that the sisters were no strangers to life's hardships. They had learned to protect themselves, and their caution now made him respect them even more. As the morning progressed, they worked together on the garden and the small fence, their movements deliberate and synchronized. John noticed small interactions that had become more pronounced over the past days. Leela's hand brushed his as she passed him a tool, her touch playful and lingering. Rosalie offered guidance on planting, and their hands met briefly, her fingers gentle and attentive. Maya watched quietly from a distance, her protective gaze following every action, her mind clearly assessing not only John, but also the way the other two sisters responded to him. The cabin, once a simple shelter, had become a stage for subtle emotions, unspoken thoughts, and careful observations. By midday, they gathered under the shade of the large tree, their muscles tired but their spirits alive. Leela laughed at one of John's stories from his travels, her laughter light and musical, and John found himself drawn to her energy. Rosalie listened intently, asking questions that showed a depth of understanding and empathy, and John realized that she was observing him in ways that went beyond simple curiosity. Maya, however, remained composed, her words measured and deliberate, as if she were weighing the impact of each moment and deciding how much to reveal of herself and her feelings. The dynamic among them had shifted noticeably. John could feel the tension between the sisters, subtle but undeniable. Maya's protective nature sometimes softened when she spoke to him, her gaze lingering longer than usual. Leela's playful behavior carried an undertone of flirtation, a spark that had not been there when he first arrived. Rosalie's quiet observation seemed to carry a mixture of empathy and longing, as if she understood his loneliness and recognized something familiar in his journey. John, while unaware of the full depth of these emotions, sensed a change in the energy around him, an undercurrent that made even ordinary moments feel significant. As afternoon approached, they returned to the cabin to prepare a meal together. John helped where he could, chopping vegetables and stirring the stew while the sisters worked in their usual harmonious rhythm. Leela teased him lightly, making him laugh, and the sound echoed pleasantly through the small cabin. Rosalie handed him utensils and ingredients with careful attention, her hands brushing his briefly each time. Maya, while less physically interactive, offered guidance and small compliments, each word carrying weight and meaning. John felt a mix of gratitude and confusion, recognizing that he was no longer merely a guest but a participant in a delicate emotional dance he had not anticipated. After the meal, they sat near the fire, the flames casting warm shadows across the cabin walls. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken emotions. John noticed the way the sisters exchanged glances, subtle but full of meaning. He sensed the competition growing, gentle yet persistent, as each sister seemed to try to capture a different part of his attention. Maya's gaze lingered during quiet moments. Leela's laughter and teasing drew him into her playful energy, and Rosalie's soft words and careful gestures created a sense of intimacy that was impossible to ignore. John realized that he was walking a delicate line. He did not want to hurt anyone, yet he could not ignore the subtle signals being sent. He understood that his presence was stirring emotions in the sisters that they had long kept controlled, and he felt the responsibility to navigate these interactions with care. The quiet of the evening seemed to amplify these tensions, making every glance, every smile, every word carry more weight than usual. As the night grew deeper, the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, bringing with them the distant rumble of thunder. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the wind howling softly outside, making the warmth of the fire feel even more comforting. The sisters, who had long relied on each other, now found themselves grappling with new emotions, feelings of attraction, curiosity, and perhaps even hope. Each recognized the risk in acknowledging these feelings, knowing that acting on them could disrupt the delicate balance of their lives. Yet the intensity of the moment made it impossible to ignore the stirrings of desire and connection that had quietly built over the past days. The storm eventually arrived, rain pattering against the roof and the windows, creating a cocoon-like atmosphere inside the cabin. John found himself drawn into conversations that went deeper than before. Maya spoke about the importance of trust and understanding, her words carrying a mix of authority and warmth. Leela laughed softly, sharing stories of the past with a teasing tone that invited him to participate more fully in their lives. Rosalie spoke quietly, her voice filled with empathy, asking about his experiences, his fears, and the moments that had shaped him. Each interaction was charged with meaning, subtle but undeniable, and John felt the weight of responsibility in navigating these relationships with care. The night passed slowly, the storm outside mirroring the emotional turbulence within the cabin. John lay awake for a long time, reflecting on the events of the day and the subtle changes he had observed. The sisters were no longer just his hosts. They were individuals with emotions, desires, and vulnerabilities that had begun to intersect with his own. He realized that staying at the cabin meant more than finding shelter. It meant engaging with lives that had been shaped by loss and resilience, and that he had become a part of something far more complex than he had ever expected. As dawn approached, the storm subsided, leaving the world outside fresh and sparkling with raindrops. John awoke to find the sisters already tending to their morning routines, their expressions thoughtful and measured. He sensed that the events of the previous day had left their mark, and that the coming days would be filled with choices, emotions, and challenges that none of them could yet fully predict. The cabin, once a simple refuge, had become a place of transformation, a space where hearts and minds were quietly shifting, and where every action and word carried the weight of possibility. By mid-morning, they gathered outside once more, the air still cool and crisp from the storm. John offered to help with the garden again, and the sisters accepted with a mixture of amusement and subtle expectation. As he worked, he noticed the way each sister interacted with him differently, each revealing aspects of her personality and desires. Maya's protective gaze and careful guidance contrasted with Leela's playful teasing, while Rosalie's quiet empathy and gentle touches created a sense of intimacy that was both comforting and complex. It became clear to John that the delicate balance of emotions was reaching a tipping point. The sisters' feelings were no longer hidden, and each moment spent together carried a subtle but growing intensity. He knew that the days ahead would require careful thought, patience, and understanding, for the connections forming between them were powerful and potentially transformative. The cabin, the storm, and the quiet wilderness around them had created a space where emotions could flourish, where human connection could be tested and deepened, and where each of them would be forced to confront their desires, fears, and hopes. As the day drew to a close, John and the sisters gathered once more near the fire, the warmth of the flames reflecting the intensity of the unspoken emotions that now filled the cabin. Each sister's attention seemed to shift subtly, testing boundaries and exploring feelings that had been dormant for years. John realized that his presence had become a catalyst for change, not just in their lives, but in his own. The quiet moments of connection, the laughter, the shared work, and the small touches had created a network of emotions that was impossible to ignore. That night, as John prepared for sleep, he reflected on the unfolding dynamics. He knew that the coming days would be critical. Choices would need to be made, emotions would need to be acknowledged, and boundaries would need to be respected. The cabin had become more than a shelter. It was now a stage for human connection, a place where hearts were tested, and where the bonds between three sisters and a lone traveler could be challenged, strengthened, or changed forever. The morning sun filtered softly through the cabin windows, casting a golden glow over the wooden floors and the furniture worn by years of careful use. John woke feeling a mixture of resolve and quiet sadness. He had come to this remote cabin seeking only shelter, but over the days he had spent with the three sisters, he had found much more. A sense of belonging, warmth, and human connection he had not realized he had missed. Yet he also understood that his time here was limited. The sisters' lives were deeply intertwined, their bond forged through years of shared hardships and mutual support. Staying longer might risk disrupting that balance, something he could not bear to do. As he rose and dressed, he noticed the sisters already moving about, tending to their morning routines. Maya was arranging herbs by the windowsill, Leela was collecting fresh eggs from the small coop, and Rosalie was tending to the garden, her fingers gently brushing the leaves and flowers. Each sister moved with practiced ease, yet John could sense that the events of the previous days had left their mark. There was a quiet tension, a mixture of longing and understanding, in the way they looked at him. He knew that today, more than ever, would require sensitivity, honesty, and care. John offered to help with the morning chores, and Maya nodded, her expression calm but guarded. "It is good that you wish to assist," she said. "But remember, the balance here is delicate. Every action has meaning." John nodded, fully aware of the responsibility he carried. He fetched water, carried firewood, and helped tend the garden, mindful of the small glances and subtle gestures that reflected the sisters' emotions. Leela's laughter broke the morning stillness as she playfully teased him, while Rosalie's gentle questions drew out his thoughts and reflections. Maya, ever watchful, occasionally offered guidance, her eyes revealing both caution and care. By midday, the sisters suggested they take a break under the shade of the large tree outside the cabin. John joined them, and they shared a simple meal together, the air filled with the soft hum of conversation and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The atmosphere was tender and charged, each moment carrying subtle significance. John realized that the connections formed over the past days had grown into something deeper, a web of emotion that included trust, curiosity, and the beginnings of affection. Yet he also understood the unspoken truth. He could not remain indefinitely without altering the delicate harmony that had sustained the sisters. Maya spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "John, your presence here has been a gift. We have enjoyed your company, your kindness, and your care. But you must understand that our lives are built on trust and respect for ourselves and for each other. We cannot allow attachment to disrupt the bond we share." John listened, feeling the weight of her words. "I understand," he replied softly. "I came here seeking shelter, but what I have found is far more meaningful. I respect your bond, and I will do everything I can to ensure that it remains intact." Leela, sitting beside him, reached out briefly to touch his arm, a gesture of warmth and connection. "We have enjoyed having you here," she said, her voice lighter now. "But we also know that life moves forward. You must do what is right for you, and we must do what is right for ourselves." Rosalie, quiet and reflective, added, "We are grateful for the moments we've shared. You have reminded us of the value of trust, care, and understanding. Whatever happens next, we will carry this experience with us." John felt a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He knew that leaving would be difficult, yet staying could complicate matters and potentially hurt the sisters. He wanted to honor their lives, their bond, and the subtle emotions that had developed between them. After a moment of thought, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I believe it is time for me to continue my journey. Staying longer would not be fair to any of us. I will always cherish the kindness, wisdom, and companionship you have shown me." The sisters nodded, each processing his words in her own way. Maya gave a slight smile, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and sadness. Leela's expression was wistful, but she laughed softly, a sound that carried both warmth and longing. Rosalie, ever gentle, reached out to place her hand briefly over his, a silent gesture of connection and understanding. In that moment, no words were needed. They all understood the impact they had had on each other's lives and the necessity of parting ways. John spent the remainder of the morning helping the sisters with final tasks around the cabin. He mended a section of the fence, carried water from the stream, and helped prepare a simple lunch. Each task was filled with intention, a way of expressing his gratitude and respect. The sisters worked alongside him, their interactions careful yet genuine, reflecting the bond that had formed over the past days. Though subtle, there was a sense of closure in their actions, an unspoken acknowledgement that this chapter of their lives was drawing to a close. As the sun climbed higher, John packed his few belongings, preparing to leave the small cabin that had become a place of warmth, reflection, and unexpected connection. The sisters gathered near the doorway, their expressions a mixture of pride, affection, and quiet sorrow. They had shared laughter, work, stories, and moments of intimacy, yet they knew that the bonds formed must be honored by allowing him to continue his journey. Maya spoke first, her voice steady. "You are always welcome here, John. Our doors and our hearts are open to you. But you must follow the path you have chosen, and we will follow ours." Leela stepped forward, her playful energy softened by the seriousness of the moment. "Thank you for bringing laughter and companionship to our lives, even for a short while. Remember us as we will remember you." Rosalie's hand brushed briefly against his arm, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "You have reminded us of trust, care, and human connection. Carry these lessons with you, and know that our gratitude will always be with you." John felt a deep sense of emotion welling up inside him. He bowed his head slightly, humbled by their words. "I will carry this experience with me always," he said. "You have given me more than shelter. You have given me a reminder of what it means to connect with others, to trust, and to care. I will never forget you." With final nods and warm smiles, John stepped outside, the cabin and the canyon stretching out before him. He paused for a moment, taking in the familiar sights, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, the garden filled with life, and the small structure that had sheltered him for days. He knew that leaving would be bittersweet, but he also recognized that parting was a necessary act of respect for the lives and emotions they had all shared. As he began to walk down the path that led away from the cabin, he felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. The sisters watched him go, their eyes reflecting the quiet strength and resilience that had defined their lives. Maya, Leela, and Rosalie stood together, bound by shared experiences and the knowledge that human connection, even when brief, could leave a lasting mark. They had been reminded of their own capacity for trust, care, and openness, and they knew that life could still bring unexpected moments of meaning. John walked for hours, the sun casting long shadows across the landscape. He reflected on the days spent with the sisters, the stories shared, the work accomplished, and the subtle yet profound emotions that had emerged. He realized that his journey had not only been a search for shelter, but also a journey into understanding the depth of human connection, the resilience of the human spirit, and the importance of respecting the bonds that others hold dear. As evening approached, he paused at the edge of a small hill, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, a breathtaking reminder of the world's beauty and the fleeting nature of moments. John felt a quiet sense of peace. Though he would continue his travels, the experience with the three sisters had changed him. He had learned to appreciate trust, kindness, and the subtle ways people touch each other's lives, even briefly. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, the sisters tended to their home and garden, their bond strengthened by the shared experience. They spoke little of John, yet each carried memories of his presence, the way he had worked alongside them, the stories he had shared, and the gentle respect he had shown for their lives. His departure had not left emptiness, but rather a renewed sense of their own strength, independence, and capacity for care. They knew that life would continue, filled with challenges and joys, and that the connection they had formed with John, however brief, would remain a treasured memory. As night fell over the canyon, the fire in the cabin burned low, casting flickering light over the familiar spaces. The sisters sat together quietly, reflecting on the days gone by. Maya's eyes held a mixture of pride and calm. Leela's smile was gentle but thoughtful, and Rosalie's expression reflected warmth and understanding. The cabin, though now quieter, remained a place of life, resilience, and connection, a testament to the enduring strength of human relationships and the subtle power of compassion. John continued on his path, the stars beginning to twinkle above him. The world felt both larger and smaller than ever before. Larger because he had glimpsed lives shaped by courage, resilience, and care. Smaller because the bonds formed, however brief, reminded him that human connection could transcend distance, time, and circumstance. With each step, he carried the lessons of the cabin, the sisters, and the moments of trust and understanding he had shared. Though their paths had diverged, the impact of their encounter would remain with all of them. John wiser, the sisters strengthened, and all four touched by the quiet beauty of shared experience. And as the night deepened, the canyon held their memories gently, a silent witness to the extraordinary in the ordinary and the profound in the fleeting.